The mountain road turned to slick ice in a heartbeat, and my car, once a safe haven, spun into the ravine like a forgotten toy. One moment I was planning my welcome home, the next, a searing pain shot up my twisted ankle, and the brutal cold started to creep into my bones. Stranded in a blizzard, with a dead car and a dwindling water bottle, the only thing that stood between me and freezing solid was the memory of my Grandpa Silas and the whispering fire he taught me long ago. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. The winding road through the Anaconda Pintler Wilderness had always felt like coming home, even after 5 years of city life and crisp blueprints. My little sedan hummed a happy tune, carrying me closer to the familiar scent of pine and the warm hug I knew awaited me at the trading post. The late autumn air, usually just brisk, had a curious snap to it, a warning I perhaps should have heeded more closely. I remember smiling, thinking about Arthur, my brother, and how he'd probably tease me for showing up like a proper city slicker. The mountain passes always had a way of clearing my head, making the endless concrete towers and hurried deadlines feel like a distant dream. Then, just as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, the first flakes began to fall. Not soft, gentle flakes, but angry, swirling bits of ice that stung my windshield. In a matter of minutes, the road, which had been merely damp, became a treacherous, glassy ribbon. My grip tightened on the wheel, my smile fading as the car started to feel less like a trusty companion and more like a skittish animal beneath my hands. A gust of wind, sharp and sudden, slammed into the side of the car, and the world outside turned into a blinding white blur. One moment I was fighting the wheel, trying to keep us pointed straight. The next, the tires gave up their grip entirely. The car fishtailed, a sickening lurch that threw me against the door, then spun violently, a terrible symphony of screeching metal and shattering glass. Time seemed to stretch and snap, and the world tilted. There was a horrifying grinding roar as my reliable little car plunged down a steep embankment, rolling once, then slamming to a halt against a thick, snow-covered pine tree. The airbag exploded against my face, smelling faintly of gunpowder and dust, leaving my ears ringing. Silence, a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the rasp of my own ragged breath. My body ached in a dozen places, but a white-hot pain screamed up my left leg, making my vision blur. When I dared to look, my ankle was twisted at a ghastly angle, already beginning to swell, the raw throbbing a cruel constant. I tried the ignition, but the engine only coughed a sad, defeated gurgle, and the heater, the only source of warmth, remained stubbornly silent. A shiver, deep and bone-chilling, worked its way through my layers of clothing. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of my mind. I was off the road, hidden by the fresh snow that was quickly piling up, erasing any sign of my ill-fated detour. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen remained stubbornly black, a dead weight in my trembling fingers. Outside, the blizzard howled, a hungry beast wrapping its icy tendrils around the wreckage. My small emergency kit, usually a comfort, felt pitifully inadequate. A half-empty bottle of water, already frigid, and a forgotten bag of jerky, dry and tough, probably from last year's hunting trip. Not nearly enough to last. The last sliver of daylight, a bruised purple bruise on the horizon, was quickly swallowed by the onslaught of snow and gathering darkness. The car, once my safe bubble, was now just a metal coffin, growing colder by the minute. I peered out the shattered window, seeing nothing but a relentless swirling white and the looming shadows of ancient trees. I was alone, truly alone, in the heart of the wilderness, and night was falling fast, bringing with it a deep, profound cold that promised to steal more than just my body heat. The silence inside the crumpled car was just as chilling as the blizzard outside. My breath plumed out in little clouds, and the icy grip of the cold was tightening around me. My ankle screamed with a hot, insistent pain. But a different kind of cold dread was seeping into my heart. My phone was dead, the car a twisted wreck, and I was hidden from the road by a wall of churning snow. Lying there, listening to the wind howl like a hungry wolf, I knew I couldn't stay. The car was a metal box, and it was quickly becoming a freezer. Every movement was agony, a fresh wave of nausea rising with each jolt to my leg. I pushed against the door with my good foot, wincing as it creaked open, letting in a blast of snow and bitter air that stole my breath. Dragging myself out was a slow, tortured crawl. I leaned heavily on my right leg, using my hands to steady myself against the cold, rough bark of the pine tree that had stopped my fall. The world outside was a dizzying blur of white, the air so thick with snow I could barely see more than a few feet. It was like trying to walk through a cloud made of frozen needles. I knew deep in my bones that I needed to find shelter, and fast. The thought of building something, anything with my throbbing ankle felt impossible, but the alternative was worse. I scanned the immediate area, squinting through the stinging snow. My eyes landed on a cluster of thick, ancient pines, their lower branches heavy with snow, offering a slight overhang. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. Moving was slow, agonizing work. I shuffled, one foot at a time, dragging my injured leg like a useless weight. My teeth gritted against the pain that shot all the way up my hip. My fingers, already stiff and clumsy with cold, fumbled with the smaller snapped branches that littered the ground beneath the trees. I pushed away the wet, heavy snow, feeling the damp earth beneath my freezing fingertips. The smell of pine resin and damp soil, usually comforting, now just mixed with the sharp scent of biting cold. I focused on finding the sturdiest fallen limbs, thick enough to bear a little weight, and began to lean them against a larger, leaning pine trunk. My hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from sheer exhaustion and the quiet terror gnawing at me. Each branch felt heavier than it should, and the rough bark scraped against my bare skin where my gloves had torn. I worked slowly, painstakingly. First, the bigger branches to make a kind of skeleton for my little lean-to, then smaller ones to fill in the gaps. I remembered Silas, my grandpa, showing me how to stack firewood, how to build a shelter from saplings when we were out fishing. He'd always said, "Nature provides, Elara, if you just know how to ask." Right now, nature felt more like it was taking. With my good hand, I pulled down handfuls of pine needles, wet and fragrant, and scooped up clumps of moss, layering them over the branches. It was crude, messy work, and the snow kept trying to reclaim my efforts, dusting everything in a fresh white blanket. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a small, dark opening appeared under the boughs. It wasn't much, certainly not a warm cabin, but it was a place where the direct assault of the wind and snow was lessened. Getting inside was another slow, painful ordeal. A clumsy crawl on my hands and knees, dragging my useless leg behind me. The space was tight, smelling strongly of wet pine and damp earth. I huddled deep within the layers of needles and moss, trying to pull my knees to my chest, to make myself smaller, warmer. The wind still whistled just outside, a relentless, mournful cry, and the cold was a heavy blanket that seeped through my clothes, chilling me to the very bone. My body ached, my ankle throbbed like a drum, and every muscle screamed for rest, but sleep wouldn't come. As I lay there, shivering, a new sound cut through the blizzard's roar, a subtle crack, just outside my fragile shelter, making my heart leap into my throat. The loud crack that shattered the blizzard's roar outside my meager shelter made me jump, sending a fresh wave of agony through my ankle. It sounded like a tree limb giving way under the heavy snow, a stark reminder of how fragile everything felt out here. My heart hammered against my ribs, but the cold gnawing at my bones was a more immediate terror than any unseen falling branch. Lying huddled on the damp earth, shivering uncontrolled, I knew I couldn't just wait for rescue. I had to find a way to fight back against the creeping chill. Moving was a slow, tortured dance of pain and necessity. Every shift of my body sent a sharp jolt up my leg, making me gasp. I braced myself against the cold, rough bark inside my little lean-to, pushing myself upright. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for the small bag of dried jerky. It was tough, leathery, and tasted faintly of old spices, but it was food. I tore off a small strip, forcing myself to chew it slowly, trying to trick my body into feeling less empty. The half-empty water bottle was next, the liquid inside already icy cold against my lips. I took a small, careful sip, knowing every drop was precious. What I really needed, though, was warmth, a fire. The memory of Grandpa Silas, his hands calloused and kind, telling me about whispering fire floated through my mind. "First, Elara," he'd said, his voice soft like a rustling leaf. "You need the lightest touch for the spark." I pushed myself out of the shelter, favoring my good leg, each step a carefully planned effort to avoid further pain. The wind immediately bit at my face, stealing my breath. The snow was still falling, a relentless curtain, but just a little lighter now. I scanned the trees, searching for that papery, curling birch bark Grandpa Silas had shown me. My eyes burned from the cold and the constant squinting. Finally, I spotted a silver-white shimmer on the trunk of an old birch tree, a few yards away. The bark peeled away in thin, delicate strips when I coaxed it with my stiff fingers. It felt almost weightless, like tissue paper, but I knew its power. I carefully gathered a handful, tucking the fragile pieces deep into my coat pocket, protecting them from the damp. Next, fatwood, that special resin-soaked pine that smells faintly of turpentine. Grandpa Silas always said it was like pine heartwood, full of concentrated warmth. I hobbled around the base of a fallen pine, my gaze sweeping the ground, searching for the telltale darkened wood. My hands, growing ever colder, dug into the snow, feeling for the rough texture. I finally found a piece, wedged under a root, dark and heavy with sap. I managed to break off a small chunk, the effort sending a fresh wave of aching through my shoulder. Back inside my shelter, I used a sharp rock from my emergency kit to carefully shave feather-fine curls from it. The scent of pine resin filling the small space, my fingers ached, stiff and clumsy, making the delicate work frustratingly slow. I spent what felt like hours, painstakingly collecting handfuls of dry pine needles from beneath the heaviest snow-covered branches, tiny twigs, and any dry moss I could find. My ankle throbbed with every movement, a constant companion to the deepening chill that seemed to be winning the battle against my tired body. The small pile of kindling I managed to gather looked woefully inadequate against the vast, indifferent wilderness. The wind picked up again, rattling the branches above, and the last sliver of dull light vanished entirely, leaving me in oppressive darkness. I was so cold, so very cold, and my meager pile of fuel, carefully gathered with so much pain, seemed barely enough to whisper a single spark to life. The raw cold seeped into my bones, a slow, relentless enemy. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached, and my fingers, stiff and clumsy, felt like frozen blocks as I fumbled for the ferro rod and metal striker. Inside my makeshift shelter, the air was still biting, but at least the snow wasn't directly assaulting me. I gathered the tiny, papery strips of birch bark and the feather-fine curls of fatwood into a delicate bird's nest-like bundle, just like Grandpa Silas taught me. It smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, a scent that usually brought comfort, but now just felt desperate. My good hand cradled the precious tinder, trying to protect it from the damp, while my injured leg stretched out awkwardly, a constant throb of pain echoing through my body. With my other hand, I brought the metal striker down onto the ferro rod, aiming for the heart of the nest. My first strike was weak, the sparks pathetic, barely a twinkle in the gloom. My fingers trembled, thick with cold, making it hard to get a good grip, hard to apply enough pressure. I tried again, gritting my teeth against the rising panic. This was it. This was my chance. I focused every ounce of my dwindling strength into that one movement, pushing down, then striking. There was a sharp snap that wasn't the sound of sparks. My heart jumped into my throat. I looked down, my breath hitching. The ferro rod, a small, dark cylinder, had cracked clean in half under the force of my desperate strike. Half of it lay uselessly in my palm, the other half still clutched in my frozen fingers. My hope, so fragile just moments before, threatened to shatter completely. A wave of crushing despair washed over me, cold and suffocating as the blizzard itself. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but the cold was too fierce to allow them to fall. This wasn't city planning. There was no backup, no easy fix. This was life or death, and I had just broken my most vital tool. No, I told myself. Grandpa Silas wouldn't give up. He'd find a way. His voice, calm and steady in my memory, whispered, "Nature provides, Elara. You just have to know how to ask." I still had the metal striker and the sharp rock I'd used to shave the fat wood. My numb brain slowly pieced it together. Flint and steel. It was harder, more ancient, but it was a chance. My fingers, still shaking, carefully placed the small, smooth rock in the crook of my good thumb. It was awkward, cumbersome, but it had to work. With the other hand, I brought the metal striker down onto the edge of the rock, aiming the shower of sparks towards the tiny tinder nest. Strike after strike. My muscles screamed with the effort. My hands grew colder, clumsier, and the sparks, when they came, seemed to dance away mockingly, refusing to catch. Frustration built into a tight knot in my chest. Each failed attempt chipped away at my resolve, but the image of Arthur's face, of home, pushed me forward. I wouldn't freeze out here. Not after all this. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a tiny, almost invisible flicker. A whisper of orange in the heart of the birch bark. My breath hitched. It was so small, so frail, like a dying ember. This was the whispering fire part Grandpa Silas had taught me. Blow too hard, Elara, and you scare it away. Blow too soft, and it forgets to grow. I leaned in, my chapped lips barely touching the tinder, and exhaled the gentlest puff of air. A slow, deliberate breath like telling a secret. The flicker pulsed, then brightened, a tiny orange eye opening in the darkness. I kept whispering to it, careful, soft breaths, watching as the tiny spark slowly, miraculously began to grow. My eyes welled up, not with tears of despair now, but with the searing pain of hope. The flame, no bigger than my thumbnail, danced and stretched, reaching for life. I carefully, oh so carefully, added the smallest pine needles, then the thinnest twigs, feeding it like a starving child. The air in my tiny shelter was still frigid. My ankle throbbed relentlessly, and the fire, though alive, was still so small, so vulnerable, against the vast, hungry darkness of the storm. It was a victory, yes, but I knew deep in my tired bones that keeping this precious, fragile warmth alive through the long, brutal night was going to be the hardest fight of all. That tiny spark, no bigger than a firefly, was all I had. It wavered, fragile, threatening to vanish as quickly as it appeared. My entire world narrowed to that one glowing speck in the damp tinder nest, and the memory of Grandpa Silas. It was his voice, soft and reassuring, that filled my mind. pushing back the biting cold and the ache in my ankle. He called it whispering fire, and I knew this was the exact moment for it. The critical skill he had drilled into me since I was just a little girl. I could see him clearly in my mind's eye, his big rough hands cupped around a similar bundle of birch bark and pine shavings, his weathered face lit by the hopeful glow. We'd be out on one of our treks, usually after a summer rain, and he'd always say, "Now, Elara, treat this flame like a whispered secret. Blow too hard and you scare it away. Blow too soft and it forgets to grow. Just a whisper, like telling your favorite dream." He'd make me practice blowing gently, showing me how to coax the smallest flicker into a steady, dancing flame, using just the right amount of air. He'd taught me how to find the thinnest, most papery strips of birch bark that curled away easily, almost like a gift from the tree. Then, we'd hunt for fatwood, that special pine wood soaked with resin, often found at the base of dead trees, smelling faintly of turpentine, and carefully shave it into feather-fine curls. All these tiny pieces he'd taught me to gather into that delicate bird's nest-like bundle. Now, his lesson was my lifeline. My chapped lips formed a gentle "oh," and I exhaled, slowly, carefully. A breath so soft it barely stirred the air around the tinder. The tiny orange eye pulsed, growing a fraction of an inch, then shrinking back, as if testing my resolve. My lungs ached from the cold, but I couldn't rush it. I whispered to it again, a steady, continuous stream of warm air, trying to mimic the calm, practiced rhythm Grandpa Silas always had. It was a dance between hope and desperation, a silent conversation with a stubborn spark. The scent of burning pine and birch, faint at first, began to fill the small, tight space of my shelter. It was an earthy, comforting smell, a promise of life. The tiny flame hesitated, flickered, then caught a little more, consuming the delicate birch bark with a soft, hungry crackle. My heart swelled, a sudden burning warmth spreading through my chest, chasing away a sliver of the dread. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. I continued my gentle breathing, feeding the growing flame with slow, steady puffs. With my good hand, I reached for the pile of small, dry pine needles and the thinnest twigs I had painstakingly gathered. I carefully, oh so carefully, laid the tiniest needles onto the growing flame, watching them catch and curl into bright orange embers. Each addition was a victory, a testament to Silas's patience and wisdom. The light inside the shelter strengthened, pushing back the oppressive darkness, casting dancing shadows on the rough bark walls. The heat, though still distant and weak, was a tangible presence, a defiant beacon against the freezing night. My hands, which had been numb blocks, began to tingle with returning circulation, a painful but welcome sensation. I continued to feed it slowly, deliberately, as the small, fragile flame grew into a steady, brave little fire. The tiny twigs caught, then the slightly larger ones, each one adding to the chorus of crackles. The warmth spread from the heart of the fire, chasing away the bone-deep chill that had plagued me for hours. I felt a profound connection to Silas, to all those who had come before me, facing the raw power of the wilderness with nothing but ingenuity and ancient wisdom. The fire, now a living, dancing presence, was more than just heat. It was a link to my past, a whisper of his enduring spirit in the wild, dark night. The blizzard still raged outside, a furious beast, but inside my small, glowing sanctuary, a fragile hope had taken root. I knew the night was far from over, and my twisted ankle still throbbed, a constant reminder of my predicament. But for this moment I was warm, I was alive, and the whispering fire was burning. The little fire, once just a whisper, now crackled with a brave, determined spirit, pushing back the shadows in my tiny shelter. The raw, desperate cold that had gripped my bones, began to retreat, leaving a faint, blessed warmth in its place. My ankle still throbbed, a dull, aching drumbeat beneath the surface, but the immediate terror of freezing was lessening with every lick of flame. I could almost hear Grandpa Silas chuckling, approving of my persistence. With the newfound light, I could see my surroundings a little better. My lean-to was rough, just a few branches and some pine needles, but it was a start. The blizzard still howled outside, a relentless, mournful cry. But its fury felt a little more distant now. My first task was to make this small haven truly hold the precious heat. I carefully pushed myself up, wincing, and began to work on the walls. I dug into the damp ground around my shelter's edges with my good hand, scooping up handfuls of wet earth and packing them tightly against the lower branches. It was messy, gritty work, my fingers growing stiff again in the cold, but I imagined it as a sort of mortar, sealing away the biting wind. Then, I reached for the heavy snow that had piled up against the outside of the lean-to. With careful, measured movements, I patted it onto the framework, building up a thicker layer over the pine boughs. The snow was surprisingly insulating, holding the warmth inside like a thick woolen blanket. The world outside remained a blur of white, but inside, a tiny pocket of defiance was taking shape. Next, I focused on the fire itself. It was burning well now, but it was still just on the damp ground. I remembered Silas telling me about creating a small fire pit, a place for the flames to truly thrive. With a stick and my good hand, I scraped away the damp earth, making a shallow, bowl-like depression in the center of my shelter. I lined it with a few flat, palm-sized rocks I'd found earlier, creating a little hearth. The fire settled into its new home, its flames dancing higher, radiating a more confident warmth. The smell of burning pine was richer now, a smoky, comforting scent that felt like home, despite the circumstances. My water bottle was almost empty, and the jerky was a poor substitute for real food. But with the fire going, a new possibility opened up. I broke off a small branch, twisted a piece of thin bark around one end to make a crude handle, and used it to scoop up a handful of fresh, clean snow. I held it carefully over the dancing flames. The snow melted slowly, dripping into a small, half-rotted log I'd cleared out and managed to wedge near the hearth, turning it into a makeshift cup. The water was lukewarm, tasting faintly of smoke and pine, but it was wet, and it was mine. I refilled my water bottle, feeling a surge of satisfaction that felt almost triumphant. As the hours crawled by, the blizzard's roar seemed to dim. The wind still sang its icy song, but the inside of my little shelter was a different world entirely. The air was breathable, smoky but warm. My socks, which had been damp and miserable, were now slowly drying by the fire, radiating a faint steam. I even managed to stretch my injured ankle out towards the flames, the gentle heat easing some of the sharp pain, softening it into a dull ache. My body, exhausted and battered, finally began to relax. I leaned back against the rough pine trunk, watching the flames dance, feeling the blessed warmth sink into my skin. The fear hadn't vanished completely, not with the wilderness still raging outside. But something new had settled over me. It was strange, unexpected. But as I sat there, wrapped in the warmth of the fire I had built, a profound sense of comfort began to bloom in my chest. Right here in the heart of the storm, the brave little fire, now a steady dancer, fought valiantly against the encroaching darkness and the relentless cold. It pushed back the shadows in my tiny shelter, creating a small, flickering world of warmth. But the night was a vast, hungry beast, and my fire was just a tiny, defiant spark. The clock inside my head had long stopped ticking, but I knew the hours were dragging by, each one heavier and colder than the last. My ankle throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that pulsed in time with my weary heart, and my entire body felt like a lead weight. desperate for true rest. Sleep was a dangerous luxury I couldn't afford. Every time my eyelids grew heavy, the warmth on my face seemed to dim, and the fire's crackle softened, a stark reminder of the vigilance required. I had to keep it alive. My pile of carefully gathered fuel was dwindling, melting away like my last reserves of energy. So, with painful, slow movements, I'd push myself out of the meager shelter, favoring my good leg, each shuffle a fresh jolt of agony. The snow had mercifully stopped falling for a time, leaving a heavy, glittering blanket over everything. But the air outside was still a knife edge, stealing the breath from my lungs. My fingers, thick and clumsy from the cold, searched beneath the snow-laden boughs for fallen twigs and smaller branches. Anything that felt even remotely dry. The rough bark scraped against my skin, sending shivers up my arms. Every time I found a usable piece, a small, grateful sigh would escape my lips, a tiny victory against the overwhelming odds. I brought the precious fuel back, my arms aching, and carefully fed the fire, piece by careful piece, coaxing it to maintain its brave glow. The smoky scent of burning pine clung to my clothes, a primal comfort in the wild. The world outside was a symphony of desolation. The mournful whistle of the wind through the pines, the subtle creak of overburdened branches, and the occasional unsettling thump as a heavy clump of snow fell from a tree. Inside, the fire hissed and popped, a lively counterpoint to the quiet dread that tried to settle in my chest. My stomach growled with a hollow ache, and I took another small bite of the leathery jerky, trying to ignore its dry, salty taste. The water, melted from snow, was barely cool, a strange, smoky drink, but it kept my throat from feeling completely parched. My gaze kept straying to the entrance of the shelter, where the dark swallowed everything beyond a few feet. What creatures were out there, moving through the silent, frozen world? The thought sent shivers, colder than the air, down my spine. I huddled closer to the fire, its warmth radiating outwards, fighting back the chill that tried to creep through the earth beneath me and the thin branches above. Grandpa Silas's words echoed. The mountain is a kind old woman, Elara, but she demands respect, and she tests your spirit. This night, she was testing every fiber of my being. I must have drifted off for a moment because I woke with a jolt, the fire a dim, smoldering heap. Panic flared, sharp and immediate. My hand scrambled for the remaining kindling, shoving it frantically into the glowing embers, blowing gently until the tiny flames flickered back to life. A small, desperate resurrection. The cold had crept in, deepening the ache in my bones, reminding me of its constant, patient threat. Just when I thought I couldn't endure another hour, another moment of pain and vigilance, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the quality of the darkness began to occur. The black outside the shelter's entrance seemed to soften, turning from inky to a deep, bruised purple. Then, very slowly, a sliver of pale, silver-gray light began to push its way over the distant, snow-covered peaks. It wasn't the warmth of a sunrise, not yet, but it was the promise of an end to the brutal night, a gentle, silent confirmation that I had made it through. The blizzard's howl had died down to a low, weary sigh, and an eerie stillness had settled over the wilderness. I was alive, but as my eyes adjusted to the fragile dawn, the vast, unbroken blanket of untouched snow stretched out before me, silent and utterly empty, revealing just how far I was from anything familiar. The dawn light was still thin and watery, painting the world in shades of cold gray and bruised purple. My fire, though smaller now, still glowed bravely, a warm heart in my tiny shelter. My ankle throbbed with a persistent ache, but the bone-deep chill had finally loosened its grip. I huddled closer to the flames, trying to gather what little strength I had left. The blizzard had completely died down, leaving an eerie, heavy silence over the wilderness, broken only by the crackle of my fire and the slow, steady rhythm of my own breathing. I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait. My supplies were practically gone, and that vast, unbroken expanse of snow outside told me I was a long, long way from the road, let alone the trading post. Arthur would be worried sick by now. He'd know something was wrong. My mind, clear for the first time in hours, raced through logical steps. How did people find you in the wilderness? Signals, smoke, sound. Pushing myself up was a slow, painful process. Every muscle screamed in protest, and my twisted ankle sent sharp jolts up my leg with each movement. I hobbled to the entrance of my shelter, peering out. The snow was deep, fresh, and pristine, utterly untouched. It looked beautiful, almost peaceful, but it was a deadly silent barrier. My wrecked car was just a hump of white in the distance, almost completely buried. I looked at my fire, then at the sky. A column of smoke, even a small one, might be visible. I started gathering more fuel, bigger pieces this time, carefully selecting drier branches from under the thickest pines. My hands ached, but the urgency was a powerful motivator. I piled the new fuel onto my existing fire, coaxing it, breathing into it, until the flames leaped higher, hungrier. A thin plume of smoke, fragrant with pine, began to curl upwards, a hopeful tendril against the pale sky. It wasn't a raging bonfire, but it was something. I spent what felt like forever, tending the fire, keeping the smoke visible, all the while listening for anything beyond the whisper of the wind. My ears strained, trying to pick out any sound that wasn't nature's own. The quiet was so profound, it almost hurt. I imagined Arthur, maybe even Grandpa Silas, out there looking for me. The thought warmed me more than the fire. Then, just as the sun finally peeked over the eastern ridge, painting the snow-covered peaks in a dazzling, blinding white, I heard it. A faint, distant drone. At first I thought it was just the wind, playing tricks on my exhausted mind. But then it came again, louder this time, a steady, rhythmic thrumming that grew slowly, steadily, in the crisp morning air. My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden powerful surge of adrenaline. It was a helicopter. I struggled out of my shelter, ignoring the searing pain in my ankle, pushing myself into the deep snow. I waved my arms, desperate, frantic, shouting until my throat was raw, even though I knew they couldn't possibly hear me over the distant engine. The sound grew louder, closer. The distinct thump, thump, thump of rotor blades chopping through the air. My eyes scoured the vast blue expanse of sky, searching, pleading. And there it was. A dark speck against the brilliant sky, growing larger by the second, heading in my general direction. My breath hitched, a sob catching in my chest. Relief, so overwhelming it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I had made it. Someone was coming. They had found my smoke. The helicopter drew nearer, a dark silhouette against the brightening sky, its thumping blades echoing off the silent mountains. It was a rescue chopper, unmistakable with its bright orange markings. It flew past, further up the pass, then circled back, lower this time. I continued to wave, my voice hoarse, tears finally streaming down my frost-chapped cheeks. They saw me. They had to. Then, just as the helicopter was directly overhead, hovering for a moment, the world below it shifted. A crack, sharp and sudden, echoed through the silence. A large section of snow, dislodged by the helicopter's powerful downdraft, broke free from the slope just above me. It wasn't a full avalanche, but a terrifying, rushing sheet of white, hurtling directly towards my fragile shelter, threatening to bury everything, including me. In an instant, I watched it come, a frozen wave of death, and knew that even as rescue arrived, I was in greater danger than ever before. The wave of snow, dislodged by the helicopter's powerful rotors, roared towards me like a white-fanged beast. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. There was no time to run, no escape. I instinctively threw my good arm over my head, burying my face in my arm, bracing for impact, clutching the last bit of warmth from my fire. It hit with a muffled thump. A cold, suffocating blanket that pressed me down into the earth, burying me instantly in a rush of frigid powder. My lungs burned, air pushed from them in a gasp. The sheer weight of it was terrifying. Then, just as quickly as it had fallen, the snow settled. I clawed my way up, coughing and sputtering, shaking off the heavy white powder that clung to my hair and clothes. My little fire pit was buried, a faint wisp of smoke struggling to escape from beneath the fresh snow. But my shelter, though battered, had held. The helicopter, momentarily obscured, now hovered directly overhead, its powerful downdraft whipping the remaining loose snow into a frenzy. I squinted against the stinging blast, brushing snow from my eyes. A ladder, thick and yellow, began to descend from the belly of the machine, swaying slightly in the turbulent air. A figure in a bright orange suit, safety harness glinting, started to climb down, his voice muffled by the roaring blades. "We've got you! Are you okay?" Relief, potent and intoxicating, flooded through me. Tears, hot and real this time, finally broke free, tracing warm paths down my frozen cheeks. I just nodded, too choked up to speak, too numb to feel anything but the overwhelming sensation of being seen, found. This was it. The end of the terror, the cold, the agonizing uncertainty. Soon I'd be safe, warm, and back to the world of logical problems and clean blueprints. But then, as the rescuer got closer, his heavy boots crunching on the snow, his kind, concerned face a welcome sight, a strange tightness began to knot in my stomach. He was extending a gloved hand, offering a way out, a clear path back to everything I'd known, and suddenly I hesitated. My eyes drifted from the bright orange suit to the small, snow-dusted remnants of my fire, where a brave plume of smoke still whispered. I looked at the rough, pine-scented walls of my little shelter, still standing against the wild, and felt the familiar ache in my twisted ankle, a testament to the grit that had carried me through the night. I thought of the endless stretch of pristine white snow, the ancient, silent trees that had witnessed my struggle. I had faced down the mountain's fury, the bone-chilling cold, the gnawing hunger, and the crushing despair. I had found whispering fire, just like Grandpa Silas taught me, not with city logic, but with the quiet wisdom that ran through my veins. 5 years. 5 years of concrete towers and deadlines, of solving problems on paper, far from the rough, honest earth. And in one brutal night, this wilderness had stripped away every pretense, every layer of my city life, and shown me who I truly was, what I could truly do. It had been terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating, raw, real. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and I had done it alone. The thought of stepping onto that ladder, of leaving this place, of letting go of this profound, hard-won victory, felt like a betrayal, not of the rescuer, but of myself. The rescuer, sensing my pause, lowered his hand slightly, his brow furrowed with a question. "Ma'am, are you able to move?" I looked at him, then back at the majestic, indifferent mountains, now bathed in the glorious, cold light of morning. My lungs filled with the crisp, clean air, sharp with the scent of pine and fresh snow. I had come home seeking comfort, but the mountain had given me something far more profound, a rediscovery of strength I hadn't known I possessed. Getting on that ladder meant stepping back into a world where I solved problems with a pen, not with my bare hands and Grandpa's old lessons. It meant leaving this wild, aching, triumphant part of myself behind. The full weight of my decision settled on me then, heavy and cold as the surrounding snow. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that I wasn't sure if I truly wanted to be rescued. The rescuer's hand was still extended, a beacon of safety, but my gaze lingered on the raw beauty of the snow-covered mountains, on the last tendrils of smoke curling from my little fire. My heart still thumped in my chest, a powerful rhythm, no longer from fear, but from the incredible realization of what I had just walked through, what I had built through. It wasn't about the broken ferro rod or the makeshift shelter. It was about the whispering fire, a lesson from Grandpa Silas that had been tucked away in my memory, waiting for the moment it would truly matter. I remembered him, Silas, his hands gnarled and strong, showing me how to gently coax a flicker from the tinder. Back then, it felt like a game, a secret mountain trick, part of the endless fascination of my childhood summers at the trading post. I'd watch him, mesmerized, as he'd find those thin, papery strips of birch bark, almost like he was asking the tree for a gift. He'd carefully shave the fat wood, each curl smelling like the deepest forest, and gather them into a nest so delicate, a bird might mistake it for its own. I'd laugh when he'd tell me to whisper to the flame, thinking it was just a silly old man's way of teaching a little girl. But in that brutal, freezing night, with my ankles screaming and the despair gnawing at my edges, his whimsical lesson became a lifeline. It wasn't just a trick anymore. It was the entire world. When I broke the ferro rod, when my fingers were numb and clumsy, his voice was there, not just as a memory, but as a guiding hand. He wasn't just showing me how to make fire. He was teaching me patience, resilience, and the profound respect required to truly connect with the natural world. He taught me that sometimes the softest touch holds the most power, that a whisper can start a fire that saves your life. Before, I saw Grandpa Silas as a warm, loving man who taught me charming, old-fashioned skills. Now standing here, alive and breathing in the crisp morning air, I saw him as a sage, a keeper of ancient knowledge, a true master of survival who understood the intricate language of the wilderness. He hadn't just passed down a skill, he had woven a philosophy into my spirit, a quiet strength that city blueprints and logical equations could never provide. My 5 years away, building towers of glass and steel, felt so distant, so sterile compared to the vibrant, terrifying, life-affirming struggle I had just endured. I realized that the wisdom he shared wasn't just about doing something. It was about being something. He taught me to listen, not just with my ears, but with my whole being. To the wind, to the trees, to the subtle shift in the light, to my own body, telling me when to rest, when to push. He taught me that strength isn't always about brute force, but about perseverance, about finding the delicate balance between fighting and yielding. This mountain hadn't just broken my car. It had cracked open my urban shell and revealed a part of myself I hadn't known was there. A deep, quiet well of endurance and connection. I looked at the rescuer, then back at the majestic, indifferent mountains, now bathed in the glorious cold light of morning, my lungs filled with the crisp, clean air, sharp with the scent of pine and fresh snow. I had come home seeking comfort, but the mountain had given me something far more profound, a rediscovery of strength I hadn't known I possessed. The greatest blueprints aren't drawn on paper, but forged in the heart of a storm. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people. The rescuer's hand was still extended, a beacon of safety. But my gaze lingered on the raw beauty of the snow-covered mountains, on the last tendrils of smoke curling from my little fire. My heart still thumped in my chest, a powerful rhythm, no longer from fear, but from the incredible realization of what I had just walked through, what I had built through. It wasn't about the broken ferro rod or the makeshift shelter. It was about the whispering fire. A lesson from Grandpa Silas that had been tucked away in my memory, waiting for the moment it would truly matter. I remembered him, Silas, his hands gnarled and strong, showing me how to gently coax a flicker from the tinder. Back then, it felt like a game, a secret mountain trick, part of the endless fascination of my childhood summers at the trading post. I'd watch him, mesmerized, as he'd find those thin, papery strips of birch bark, almost like he was asking the tree for a gift. He'd carefully shave the fat wood, each curl smelling like the deepest forest, and gather them into a nest so delicate, a bird might mistake it for its own. I'd laugh when he'd tell me to whisper to the flame, thinking it was just a silly old man's way of teaching a little girl. But in that brutal, freezing night, with my ankles screaming and the despair gnawing at my edges, his whimsical lesson became a lifeline. It wasn't just a trick anymore. It was the entire world. When I broke the ferro rod, when my fingers were numb and clumsy, his voice was there. Not just as a memory, but as a guiding hand. He wasn't just showing me how to make fire. He was teaching me patience, resilience, and the profound respect required to truly connect with the natural world. He taught me that sometimes the softest touch holds the most power, that a whisper can start a fire that saves your life. Before, I saw Grandpa Silas as a warm, loving man who taught me charming, old-fashioned skills. Now standing here, alive and breathing in the crisp morning air, I saw him as a sage, a keeper of ancient knowledge, a true master of survival who understood the intricate language of the wilderness. He hadn't just passed down a skill, he had woven a philosophy into my spirit, a quiet strength that city blueprints and logical equations could never provide. My 5 years away, building towers of glass and steel, felt so distant, so sterile compared to the vibrant, terrifying, life-affirming struggle I had just endured. I realized that the wisdom he shared wasn't just about doing something. It was about being something. He taught me to listen, not just with my ears, but with my whole being. To the wind, to the trees, to the subtle shift in the light, to my own body, telling me when to rest, when to push. He taught me that strength isn't always about brute force, but about perseverance, about finding the delicate balance between fighting and yielding. This mountain hadn't just broken my car. It had cracked open my urban shell and revealed a part of myself I hadn't known was there, a deep, quiet well of endurance and connection. I looked at the rescuer, then back at the majestic, indifferent mountains, now bathed in the glorious cold light of morning. My lungs filled with a crisp, clean air, sharp with the scent of pine and fresh snow. I had come home seeking comfort, but the mountain had given me something far more profound, a rediscovery of strength I hadn't known I possessed. The greatest blueprints aren't drawn on paper, but forged in the heart of a storm. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.